Okay, so today we're talking about electrolytes, and we're going to kick off this conversation by talking about Gatorade and Pedialyte. So what is Gatorade and Pedialyte? Well, we know that Gatorade is an American-based sports drink. Most people have heard of it. Pedialyte is an electrolyte beverage for children. Now, it's not only consumed by children, but it was created for children. And both of these are almost a commercial replacement for oral rehydration therapy. We're going to talk about that in the next slide. They are also designed to rehydrate, provide fluids after the loss of fluids and electrolytes. We're going to talk about what electrolytes are today. So what are they made out of? What's the composition? So Gatorade notably has far less sodium and potassium than Pedialyte. Sodium and potassium are some of the electrolytes we're going to be speaking about today. Gatorade also almost always has a lot more sugar than Pedialyte does. Pedialyte has no sucrose. Sucrose is a type of sugar that can cause diarrhea in young kids and infants, so they don't put it in there as a sweetener. And then there's flavorings, colorings, water, etc., etc. So let's talk about oral rehydration therapy. So oral rehydration therapy, what is it? Well, it's a fluid replacement designed to prevent or treat dehydration. You often find this stuff in developing countries. You can find it in developed countries, but it's used in situations where there's a lot of malnutrition. Where there's malnutrition, there's always dehydration. So you can find these in these little packs right here. It's just a pack of some salts. You put it in some water. It helps replenish the electrolytes. It also can come in little bottles with electrolytes already in them. So inside these packets or the bottles, you'll find glucose, which is a sugar, sodium citrate, which helps with absorption of water electrolytes, sodium chloride, which is table salt, potassium chloride. These are salts that will dissolve into ions. We're going to talk about that in a second. And these are used to replenish the body when it's lacking certain nutrients. Oftentimes you'll have diseases that will cause dehydration, like cholera. So if you develop cholera, you're going to go through a lot of pretty terrible things. Notably, when your small intestine gets infected by this bacteria, you're going to have a lot of vomiting and diarrhea. Now, why is that bad? It's bad because if you suffer through that constantly, which happens to those who have cholera, you will die due to loss of water and electrolytes. It's a pretty terrible way to die. And this disease is being fought constantly in developing countries. And this happens when there's low sanitation and hygiene. So what are electrolytes? Well, electrolytes are ions. Now, what's an ion? I mentioned this in a couple of my videos, but let's take table salt, sodium chloride. When you consume table salt or any other type of salt, it breaks up into these ions, sodium ion, chloride ion. Without getting too deep into it, just know that ions are elements that have a little bit of a charge. And that'll be necessary as we talk about stuff in a few minutes. Now, these ions are used by the body to regulate, right, to control fluids, water intake, nervous system function, brain, spinal cord, muscle function, right, the muscles you use to move, grab stuff, walk, and pH balance. Now, pH is a measure of how acidic or basic something is. Without getting into it, just know that this needs to be in perfect balance for your body to function in an optimal condition. Okay, so let's get a little bit more detailed. Got this beautiful drawing of a nerve. And we're gonna zoom in here to where these nerves talk to each other. So if you watch my nerve agent video or my snake venom video, you'll see this as familiar. When we have these nervous impulses, these electrical impulses, these action potentials that move down our nerve endings, they cause some changes that will communicate a message. In this case, you'll have these vesicles, these little sacs, we'll just call them sacs, that will attach to this nerve ending and release their contents. Now, these contents are chemicals that when they bind, when they connect to these receptors, they send a certain message. So it could be a muscle impulse to move a muscle. Let's grab that coffee cup. Or it could be just an impulse that your nervous system has for feeling or whatever. Now, we've talked about this before. When it binds, you'll have another signal that gets sent, another action potential to relay the message. Now, what do electrolytes have to do with this? So electrolytes are these little molecules that regulate this stuff. So in this case, calcium will move in to this nerve ending, and it will actually help these sacs to connect to the nerve ending to release their contents. And then down here, You'll have sodium and potassium as they move in and out of this nerve ending, also cells. They create a little bit of a charge, and this charge builds up and it actually creates an action potential. And then that fires off and relays the message. So these ions are really important for some of the electrical function of our body, from our cells to almost everything else. Now, practically, let's look at the heart. The heart has these things called nodes. These nodes are the electrical stations that when a nervous impulse runs into them, they allow the heart to contract and to beat. The heart beats automatically, and it's because of the nervous system. So if these ions are disturbed in any way, you could have a loss of certain types of heart function. So now you can see how it relates practically. So let's go back to the cholera example. We're going to talk about electrolytes and imbalance of electrolytes. So we're going to talk about the loss of calcium, sodium, and potassium. And we're going to use some definitions. Hypo means low. Hyper means high. So in this case, we're talking about hypocalcemia, hyponatremia, hypokalemia. Low calcium, muscle cramps, numbness in fingers, irregular heartbeat. Low sodium, vomiting, seizures. You could have what's called a brain herniation, where your brain tissue pushes past the barrier that it's in and can cause death and all sorts of crazy stuff. And then low potassium, weakness, irregular heartbeat. We spoke about how these ions earlier create this charge, and that influences the signals that get sent. So your muscles will be affected, your heart, and a whole host of other things. This is what happens when you have low electrolytes. So where are these things found? Well, sodium chloride you can find in table salt. That's what table salt is. I have some Himalayan pink sea salt here. It's a very healthy salt. It's got some nice minerals and some good electrolytes in there. You can also find it in soups, broths, tomatoes. Potassium can be found in avocados. We got a little happy avocado right here. Bananas, prunes, raisins, salmon, and other things. And then calcium, we can find this in dairy, like this little cheese I got here. Dark leafy greens, broccoli, bok choy, oatmeal, and the list goes on and on. There are more electrolytes that the body uses, but this is all I had time to go through. So let's go through the summary and refresh on the things we just talked about. So we started out with Gatorade and Pedialyte, these electrolyte beverages that are commercial substitutes for oral rehydration therapy. They have electrolytes, they have a little sugar, and they're meant to rehydrate after loss of water and electrolytes, which is why they have electrolytes in them. Then we spoke about oral rehydration therapy, this fluid replacement for prevention or treatment of dehydration. It can come in a little bottle or it can come in a little pack like this with salt. And it's necessary for things like maybe cholera, where you're losing a lot of water and a lot of electrolytes from this small intestine infection. It's also used for many other things, but the whole idea is that it's designed to replace the things that you've lost, usually due to malnutrition or disease. Then we talked about electrolytes. They're these ions, these charged elements that the body uses to regulate fluids, nervous system function, muscle function, pH balance, optimal function of the human body. Then we got a little complex and talked about the nervous system and muscles, how these ions help regulate these movements of electrical signals, muscle function, nervous system function, so on and so forth. We also spoke on the heart. That's an electronic muscle that needs these ions to function properly. Then we spoke about what would happen if you lost some of these electrolytes, like in cholera, where you're losing heavy water and electrolytes, muscle cramps, irregular heartbeat, vomiting, seizures, so on and so forth. These ions are extremely important for our survival, and we don't have enough, and when we have too many, it can really mess with our balance that we're trying to maintain. Then we spoke about where they're found. You get soups, broths, salt, avocados, dairy, etc., etc. You can find electrolytes in a lot of different things outside of Pedialyte and Gatorade. So that's all I got. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell your friends, and I'll be back soon with another video.